I met Claire at a mutual friend's engagement party. I didn't want to go, if I'm being honest. It had been a long week, and making small talk with a bunch of people I didn't know over lukewarm catered food wasn't my idea of a good Friday night. But my best friend, Eric, dragged me there, said I needed to stop working weekends and rejoin the land of the living. He was right, probably. Claire was there with her sister, and from the second I saw her, I couldn't look anywhere else. She wasn't trying to stand out. In fact, she looked a little bored. But there was something about her, the way she listened when people talked, the way she asked questions instead of dominating a conversation. She didn't just look good, she seemed grounded, sharp, real. Eric was the one who introduced us. Said, "Ben, this is Claire, she looks equally annoyed to be here. You two should talk." That was his style, always just throwing people together and walking away. But he wasn't wrong. We clicked fast. Talked the whole night. She teased me about my tie. I told her I thought she looked like the only person in the room who actually had plans afterward. We started dating the next week. Nothing dramatic, dinner, a walk, another dinner. It didn't feel rushed or forced. It just moved forward. By month 3, I wasn't dating anyone else. By month 6, neither was she. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding, local venue, no fireworks. Just a lot of laughter, a lot of dancing, and a moment during the vows where my voice caught and she squeezed my hand like we were already in sync for life. Claire had a background in interior design, she did freelance projects, helped people redo rooms, staged homes for realtors. I worked in financial consulting. Long hours, spreadsheets, phone calls in the car. We balanced each other out, she reminded me to slow down, I reminded her to actually invoice her clients. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Not huge, but clean, bright, and ours. Eric lived 20 minutes away, and we saw him often. He was like family, dinners, birthdays, random drop-ins just to borrow tools and stay for a beer. Claire and Eric got along well. She said he reminded her of her brother, loud, smart, loyal in his own way. We had 2 kids, Ava and Nolan. They were 4 and 6 now. Ava loved puzzles and asking too many questions. Nolan was a whirlwind of energy, always running, always climbing, always hungry. Claire handled mornings. I handled bedtime. We switched for weekends. Life felt full, the kind where things fall into a rhythm before you realize they've become the default. Claire ran the house with a kind of casual efficiency, school forms signed, dinner always planned, laundry rotated like magic. I handled the taxes, the yard, the car repairs. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Weekends were our reset. Mornings with the kids piled between us on the couch, cartoons humming in the background, Claire sipping her coffee while flipping through design magazines. We took turns cooking, she made better pancakes, I handled anything on the grill. Sometimes we'd pack the kids up for a park trip or just stay home and tackle little projects. She loved moving furniture around every few months, claiming it gave the rooms new energy. I always ended up holding something heavy, but I didn't mind. Evenings were slower. Once the kids were down, we'd sit on the porch if it was warm, or put something on in the background while we both half worked, half talked. She'd sketch ideas, I'd wrap up emails. It wasn't glamorous, but it was us, steady, full, normal in a way I appreciated more with each passing year. Claire always said she wasn't a morning person, but you wouldn't know it if you saw her during the school rush. She moved like she was running a kitchen on a tight schedule, cereal poured, lunchboxes packed, socks matched and double-checked, all while calmly answering Nolan's endless questions about dinosaurs and Ava's stories from the dream she had the night before. By the time I came downstairs, everything was in motion. I handled drop-off on my way to work. Claire liked the few quiet minutes that followed, when the house emptied out and she could focus. Her projects had picked up again, a few local clients, some staging work, and a kitchen remodel she was excited about. She worked out of the home office, sometimes blasting music, sometimes working in silence for hours with a cup of tea that always went cold before she remembered it. We had dinner together most nights. Claire liked trying new recipes when she had time, and when she didn't, we stuck to what we knew: pasta, roasted chicken, leftovers from Sunday. The kids took forever to eat, always bargaining for one more bite of this if it meant one less of that. Claire had more patience for it than I did, and I liked watching her navigate it. Calm, firm, a little amused. She never looked more in control than when she was in the middle of some minor domestic chaos. Bedtime was usually mine. Claire used that time to reset the house: dishes, laundry, a quick vacuum if the day had gotten especially messy. Once the house was quiet, we'd meet on the couch, sometimes talk, sometimes sit in a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. Just comfortable. I was working longer hours lately. Not by choice, but a few of our clients were going through mergers, and I was leading 2 audits that were running tighter than expected. Claire never gave me grief for coming home late. She got it. She'd send me photos of the kids eating dinner, or Ava doing her homework, or Nolan proudly holding up a drawing. I saved every one. Weekends were for family. Claire didn't overschedule like some parents we knew, no back-to-back playdates or sports leagues we couldn't keep up with. She liked slow mornings, grocery runs with Ava, planting herbs out back. I'd toss the ball with Nolan or fix something minor in the garage that didn't really need fixing. We liked being around each other, even if we weren't always doing the same thing. Occasionally we'd get a sitter and go out, usually somewhere familiar, somewhere quiet. Claire always ordered the same thing, always made me laugh about something small. She had a habit of stealing food off my plate like she wasn't going to finish her own, and I never stopped pretending to be annoyed. We didn't travel much. It was easier to stay local with the kids still young. But Claire talked about taking them somewhere special once they were both old enough to remember it. A road trip, maybe. A beach. Somewhere that didn't feel like an extension of our regular lives. We had plans. They weren't dramatic. But they were ours. The house felt like a working machine most days. Not in a cold, mechanical way, more like a rhythm that ran smoothly because we both kept it moving. Claire was the detail person. She remembered when library books were due, who needed new shoes, which drawer the spare batteries were actually in. I took care of the bills, the maintenance stuff, the appointments that always needed to be scheduled but never were until she nudged me. Ava had started asking bigger questions lately, things about the stars, where animals go when it rains, how money actually works. Claire loved it. She said it meant she was getting curious in the right ways. Nolan was still in full action mode. He ran everywhere. If he wasn't moving, he was either asleep or about to break something. But Claire had this way of getting him to sit still, even if only for 5 minutes, and he'd rest his head against her like he needed to recharge. We'd built something that felt solid. Not flashy, not showy, just reliable. Claire had filled our home with little things that made it feel lived in: framed photos on the stairs, half-finished craft projects on the dining table, always a candle burning somewhere. The kind of place people stepped into and said, "This feels like home." We didn't have big fights. Sure, we had moments, usually about time, about how often I worked late, about how sometimes she felt like the mental load was leaning too far to her side. But they passed. We were good at recovering. No long silences. No sleeping on the couch. Just 2 people who had learned how to disagree without turning it into a war. One night, after the kids were in bed, she pulled out her laptop and sat on the floor by the coffee table. She was sketching out ideas for a client's guest room, flipping through samples and swatches. I was half watching a documentary, but mostly watching her, the way she chewed on the end of a pen while thinking, how she talked to herself under her breath. She looked up and caught me staring. "What?" she said. "Nothing. Just like seeing you in your zone." She smiled. "This one's been fun." It's a beach house, they're letting me do something really different. You always find a way to make those work. Sometimes. She leaned against the couch and kept working. I leaned forward and rubbed her shoulders without thinking. She let out a quiet hum, a little gratitude without words, and kept clicking away. Things were good. Familiar. We didn't say things like, blessed, but we had a lot to be thankful for. 2 kids who were healthy and happy. Work we didn't hate. A house that felt lived in but never chaotic. Claire had started running again. She used to jog a few times a week before the kids were born, but after Nolan came along, it sort of dropped off. Then one Saturday morning in early spring, she laced up a pair of old sneakers and said, I think I need to move more. She didn't ask for fanfare, just grabbed her headphones and went. 20 minutes the first time. Then 30. Before long, it was every other morning. She said it helped her clear her head, gave her energy she'd forgotten she missed. She looked good, too, leaner, lighter, more at ease. I told her that once. She just laughed and said, running's cheaper than therapy. The kids were finally getting to that age where they could entertain themselves for more than 5 minutes. Ava had taken over one corner of the living room for her reading nook, which was really just a pile of pillows and a flashlight she didn't need. Nolan had become obsessed with blocks and loud music. Claire kept a playlist of songs that made him dance, just to buy herself 20 minutes of calm when she needed it. Work for me had finally stabilized. One of the audits wrapped up, and I was home at a decent hour more often. We started having dinner as a family again without me running in halfway through the meal. Claire seemed glad. Not over the top, just more relaxed when I was around, less stretched thin. One Friday, we hired a sitter and went out to eat. Just the 2 of us. Not a special occasion, just time. Claire wore a black dress she hadn't touched in months, the kind that made people glance twice without knowing why. I complimented her, and she rolled her eyes like she always did, but she smiled afterward. Over dinner, we talked about everything but the kids. Her newest client wanted to turn a garage into an office/recording studio. I told her I didn't think that was a real thing. She pulled out her phone to show me inspiration photos and proved me wrong, as usual. I loved watching her work through a challenge in her head, turning chaos into something that made sense. We didn't rush through the meal. We lingered. It felt like we were dating again, just sitting across from each other, no interruptions, no responsibilities tugging at us for an hour or 2. That weekend, Claire cleaned out the guest room closet. She said she wanted to make space for her work materials, swatches, samples, things she usually kept scattered in drawers. She boxed up some old coats, a stack of books we hadn't touched in years, a few things that had belonged to her mom. She worked quietly, headphones in, music low enough for me to still hear the muffled beat. At some point, I peeked in and saw her sitting cross-legged in the middle of it all, sorting a box of fabrics by color. She looked peaceful. Like someone who had carved out a small square of the world that was just hers. There was nothing strange about it. It started with a look. One of those barely there glances that should mean nothing, and probably would have, if I hadn't been paying attention. Claire had just finished getting ready in the bathroom. She was wearing something casual, jeans and a light sweater, nothing out of the ordinary. I was standing in the doorway, talking about Nolan's birthday party and whether we should rent one of those backyard play structures. She wasn't distracted, not exactly, just, somewhere else. She looked up halfway through my sentence, nodded too quickly, and then went back to fixing her hair. You all right? I asked. She blinked like I'd pulled her out of a fog. Yeah, sorry. Just thinking about the week ahead. That made sense. She had a couple projects coming up, and I knew one of her clients was being difficult with a budget. But something about the way she came back to the conversation felt too smooth. Like she'd just slipped on a face she kept nearby. That was the first time I noticed it. Another day, I came home from work early. Just an hour ahead of schedule, nothing big. Claire didn't hear me come in. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her phone in one hand, smiling. A quiet, private kind of smile. The kind people make when they think they're alone. When she saw me, she straightened up a little too fast and set the phone down beside the fruit bowl. "You're home early." "Traffic was light," I said. She walked over, kissed me on the cheek, and started asking about my day. Seamless. Natural. But that smile, it stuck with me. It wasn't wrong. Just, off. I wasn't suspicious, not really. There was nothing obvious. She wasn't secretive with her phone. She still laughed at my jokes. We still had dinner together, still had the kind of conversations couples fall into after a decade, light, comfortable, broken up by kids yelling from the other room. But I started noticing little changes. She was checking her phone more often. Not obsessively. Just quick glances, screen on, swipe, screen off. Sometimes in the middle of a conversation. Sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. One night I asked her if she wanted to watch a movie after the kids went to bed. She hesitated, then said she was behind on emails and needed to catch up on some work. I believed her. I did. But I found myself checking the browser on our shared tablet the next day. Not for anything specific, just looking. Nothing stood out. That should have made me feel better. But it didn't. The next time we went out, it was for a double date, a couple from Nolan's daycare. Claire was polite, friendly, laughed in the right places, but I noticed she checked her phone twice during dinner. When I asked her about it later, she said it was a group chat about a design emergency. Nothing unusual. I didn't ask to see the messages. I didn't even want to. That wasn't who I was. That wasn't who we were. Still, something had shifted. I just couldn't name it yet. A few days later, I noticed Claire had started sleeping with her phone on silent. Not "do not disturb," which she'd used before, full silent, no buzz, no light. Just dark. It sat face down on her nightstand like it had something to hide. She didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. But once you notice something like that, it doesn't go unnoticed again. That same week, she switched up her routine. Claire had always been consistent, workouts in the morning, errands mid-afternoon, emails at night once the kids were in bed. But now she'd slip out in the evenings. Nothing strange on its own, just little things. A quick run to the store, meeting a friend for coffee, dropping something off at a client's place. Every time, she'd come back the same way she left, casual, warm, present. Nothing out of the ordinary. But I started keeping mental tabs. Not in an obsessive way. Just noting the time she left and the time she got back. I never said anything. I just paid attention. One Thursday, I came home a bit earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Claire's car was in the driveway, but when I stepped inside, I didn't see her. The kids were still at their after-school program, so I figured maybe she was upstairs. I called her name. No answer. When I rounded the corner to the kitchen, she appeared from the guest room, the one she'd turned into her project space. Her hair was pulled back like she'd been working, but I didn't hear any music, no video calls, no typing. Just quiet. "Oh," she said, startled. "Didn't hear you come in." "Got out early," I said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just going over samples." Lost track of time. There was nothing wrong with that answer. But she didn't look like she'd been working. No papers out. No fabric swatches on the table. The room looked like it hadn't been touched all day. We stood there for a second longer than necessary. Then she smiled and walked toward me like nothing had happened. "I was about to make tea, want some?" I nodded, even though I didn't. That night, I opened the guest room closet. Not to snoop. I just felt pulled. Everything looked normal. Boxes of materials, storage containers, some neatly labeled fabric folders. But then I noticed a small bag tucked behind one of the bins, not hidden, but not in plain sight either. It was a makeup bag. Travel size. Nothing fancy. I zipped it open. Inside, a small bottle of perfume I didn't recognize, a pack of wipes, a hairbrush, a pair of folded leggings, and a black lace bra I was certain I'd never seen her wear. Not at home, not for me. I stood there for a minute, just staring. I put everything back exactly the way I found it. Closed the door. Said nothing. That night, Claire fell asleep next to me without a word. Peaceful. Breath steady. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was still no proof. No confrontation. But the quiet was different now. Thicker. Eric and I met in college. He was loud, reckless, funny in the kind of way that made strangers want to be around him. We weren't supposed to be friends, I was quieter, more focused, but something about the difference worked. We shared an apartment senior year, split grocery bills, covered for each other during finals. He was the guy who gave the worst advice in the best way and still showed up at 3 a.m. if you needed someone to haul your broken-down car out of a ditch. We stayed close after graduation. He started a marketing firm and somehow made it work, even though he never seemed to take anything seriously. I moved into finance. Got married first. Had kids first. He joked that I was his test drive for adulthood, always watching what I did so he'd know what not to do. He met Lily about 2 years ago. Soft-spoken, kind, total opposite of him. It worked, surprisingly. They got engaged fast. He asked me to be his best man before I could say congratulations. Claire liked Lily from the start. Said she was normal, which, in Eric's orbit, was the highest praise. The wedding was set for early summer, and it was going to be big. Formal venue, black tie, rooms booked for guests at a hotel nearby. Claire was excited. She bought a new dress, talked about what she and Lily would wear for getting ready photos, even offered to help coordinate some of the design details when Lily started getting overwhelmed. As the date got closer, something shifted again. Claire seemed preoccupied. She wasn't nervous or stressed. Just distant. She spent more time texting, often ducking into another room to do it. Once, I walked by the bathroom while she was in there and heard her laugh, not the polite kind. The real kind, low and easy. I waited, listening. Silence. When she came out, she said she'd just been watching a funny video. The night before the wedding, we stayed at the hotel with the rest of the bridal party. The kids were with my sister for the weekend. It was supposed to be fun, a little mini vacation. Claire was quiet during the drive, but I chalked it up to long hours and wedding prep. At the hotel, we had dinner with the group. Everything looked normal on the surface. She smiled when people talked to her. Laughed at the right moments. But her phone didn't leave her hand. And every so often, I'd catch her eyes across the room, not at me. At Eric. At first, it made no sense. They'd always been friendly, but never flirtatious. He'd even joked, back when Claire and I were newlyweds, that she was too sharp for him to ever get away with anything. But now, there was something I couldn't unsee. The way she leaned in a little too close when she laughed at something he said. The way his gaze lingered just a second too long. That night, she fell asleep quickly. I laid awake next to her in the dark, feeling something press against my chest. Not pain. Not yet. But pressure. Something was coming. And I didn't know what to do with it. The wedding day moved in a blur. Photos, speeches, champagne being passed around like water. Claire looked beautiful, sleek black dress, hair curled in the way she only did for big occasions. Everyone said so. She smiled like it was easy. Posed with me for pictures. Laughed with Lily during makeup touch-ups. From the outside, she was the perfect guest, the perfect wife. But I watched her differently now. Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't not. I watched her look for him. Little things, how her eyes shifted when Eric walked into a room, how she smoothed her dress at the same time he adjusted his cufflinks. They never touched. Never whispered. But something passed between them. Something just beneath the surface, too quiet to call out, too loud to ignore. After the ceremony, we all moved to the ballroom for the reception. The music was loud, the drinks kept flowing, and people loosened up the way they always do after the pressure of the ceremony breaks. Claire and I danced once. She leaned her head on my shoulder and sang along softly to the music. For a moment, I tried to believe it. Tried to feel like we were still what everyone around us thought we were. Sometime around 10 p.m., I realized she was gone. I had just come back from the bar with a drink for her. She'd been talking with Lily's cousin when I left. But now the spot where she'd been standing was empty. Her glass was half full on the table. I scanned the room. No sign of her. I checked the bathroom hallway. Empty. Back in the main room, I looked for Eric. Also gone. It hit fast. I told myself to breathe. Told myself it was nothing. But I was already moving, out of the ballroom, down the corridor toward the elevators. The guest room floors had been reserved for close family and the bridal party. Claire and I had a room there too, but she wasn't in it. I stood in the hallway, staring at a row of doors, heart pounding like I'd just sprinted there. I didn't knock. I just kept walking until I stopped in front of Eric's suite, the one Lily had shown off during rehearsal night, all upgraded with champagne on ice and a giant king-sized bed. The door was shut. I don't know what made me try the handle. Maybe I thought it would be locked. It wasn't. I pushed the door open. There they were. Claire. Eric. On the bed. Clothes half on, half off. Her hair a mess. His hand on her waist like it belonged there. Both of them frozen when they saw me. No one spoke. Claire's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Eric sat up too fast, knocked over a glass on the nightstand. Water spilled. It sounded louder than anything else in the room. I stepped back. Closed the door. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I walked down the hall, one foot in front of the other, until I reached the elevator and pressed the button with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The music from the ballroom was still playing faintly through the walls. Something upbeat. Something fake. I walked out of that hotel without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. I drove to my sister's, where the kids were staying, but I didn't go inside. I just sat in the car outside their house until sunrise, staring out at the quiet street like it might hand me an answer. My phone buzzed more times than I could count, Claire's name, once from Eric, one unknown number I figured was Lily. I didn't answer any of them. At 7:30 a.m., I drove straight to my lawyer's office. He wasn't expecting me, but he saw me anyway. I didn't wait for coffee. Didn't even sit down right away. I want to file for divorce, I said. He looked up from his desk. Something happened. Yes. He didn't press. By noon, the paperwork was started. I had already changed the locks on the house through a neighbor who worked as a locksmith. My lawyer advised me to send Claire an official notice that she was not to return until custody and property matters were settled. I agreed. I didn't want her in that house again. Then I sent Lily a message. It was simple, I need to talk to you. It's about Eric. It's serious. I'm not trying to hurt you, but you need to know. She responded within minutes. We met at a quiet diner off the highway. She showed up wearing yesterday's dress, mascara smudged, face pale. She already knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what. I didn't make her guess. I told her everything. From the weeks of small changes to the night before, down to opening the door and seeing them on that bed. She didn't cry at first. Just sat there staring past me, jaw clenched, like her body wouldn't let the truth all the way in. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. They were together the night of our wedding? I nodded. She covered her mouth. Sat that way for a long time. Then she whispered, "Thank you for telling me. Everyone else would have lied." I told her she could stay with us for as long as she needed. My sister agreed to take the kids for a few extra nights. Lily moved into our guest room the next day. Meanwhile, my lawyer was already moving on the custody issue. The kids were mine, no question. Claire had put herself in a terrible position. Adultery, abandonment, emotional instability. We'd already begun to build the argument to remove her from any claim to the house or shared assets. Then something else happened. My lawyer asked me casually, "That friend of yours, Eric. What does he do for a living again?" "Owns a marketing firm." "Private?" "Yeah. Would you be okay if I ran a few checks?" I've seen this before. Guys like that often run fast and loose with the numbers. If he's sloppy in his personal life, he might be sloppy with the IRS too. I said yes. 2 days later, he called me back. His voice had a sharp edge to it. "Ben, your friend's company has been misreporting income for 3 years. Millions in revenue unaccounted for. It's not just shady. It's criminal." Within a week, the IRS had been notified. An investigation opened. Fines were calculated. Eric's company was hit with $1 million penalty. His accounts were frozen. His investors bailed. He lost everything. Claire lost everything. Lily and I. We hadn't planned on surviving it together. But we did. The silence that followed was different than I expected. It wasn't peace, not at first. It was more like a deep, low hum beneath everything, like the ground was still settling after a quake. Claire tried to reach out the first few days. Calls. Messages. Emails. None of them angry. All of them desperate in that controlled way, like she still thought she could explain it, or spin it, or maybe just rewind time. I didn't answer. She stopped showing up to her design jobs. One of her former clients, a friend of mine through work, messaged me to say Claire hadn't returned any emails. She was unraveling. I could feel it, even without seeing her. But I had no interest in watching it happen. The kids asked questions, of course. They were too young to understand everything, but not too young to know something had changed. I gave them careful answers. Told them their mom was staying somewhere else for now. That it wasn't their fault. That nothing about what was happening would ever change how much we both loved them. They took it better than I feared. Kids adapt faster than adults, maybe because they're not pretending things are fine when they're not. Lily stayed in the guest room. At first it was quiet between us, polite, supportive, but distant. She was grieving something I knew too well, the slow-motion collapse of a future you thought was real. But there was no awkwardness. No need to explain the silence. We'd both lived through the same wreckage. There was an understanding in the way we passed each other in the hallway, in how we checked on each other without pushing. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Claire had no leverage. Not after the documentation, the statements, the accounts. I kept the house. I got full custody. She got visitation under court supervision, and even that would be reevaluated. My lawyer said he'd never seen someone lose a case that quickly without even putting up a fight. She signed the paperwork in silence. Eric was dealing with his own fallout. His company was done. Liquidated within 2 months. Some of his employees filed lawsuits. One of his investors went public with a statement about fraud and betrayal. The IRS moved fast. His accounts were frozen, and Lily, with my lawyer's help, filed to nullify the marriage on grounds of fraud before the ink on the wedding certificate even dried. He tried reaching out to her. She never answered. We didn't celebrate. There wasn't some big victory moment. Just quiet. Order. The kind of stillness that comes after a long, endless hum. One night, I walked past the guest room and saw the door cracked open. Lily was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding one of Ava's drawings, the one she'd made for Aunt Lily after the first week she stayed with us. It was crayon, messy, full of hearts. She left a lot behind, Lily said without looking up. We both did, I said. She finally looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something different in her eyes. Not just hurt. Something steadier. We're not broken, you know, she said. No, I said. We're not. Summer settled in with long evenings and slower mornings. Claire moved into a one-bedroom apartment across town. She never asked to come back, not seriously. The messages eventually stopped. The supervised visits happened once a month, stiff and quiet. The kids were cautious with her. Ava was polite but distant. Nolan didn't really understand what was going on. They asked more about her at first, but over time, they just stopped. Lily stayed with us for 6 weeks. We never talked about making it permanent. We didn't need to. From the start, there was a quiet understanding, this was temporary, healing space, not some shortcut into a new life. The kids adored her. They called her Aunt Lily, and she fit the title easily. She read to them at night when I was buried in work. She taught Ava how to braid her own hair, helped Nolan build a Lego tower taller than the coffee table. She never overstepped. Never tried to fill a role that didn't belong to her. She found an apartment not far from the kids' school. Bright windows, plants on the balcony, a street with a bakery she already liked. I helped her move in. She hugged me before I left, a real one, full of quiet gratitude, and said, "You've got good kids. Keep going." "I will," I told her. And I meant it. We still talk. Sometimes she comes over for dinner. Sometimes she picks the kids up from school if I'm running behind. It's simple. Clean. Good. Not broken. Not complicated. Just the way it should be. Claire never fought for more than she was given. Not after the divorce. Not after the custody ruling. I think a part of her knew she'd already lost long before I ever filed papers. She made her choices. And I made mine. Eric disappeared from town after the fallout. His name stopped showing up in group chats. Mutual friends stopped mentioning him. The last I heard, he was trying to rebuild somewhere else. I didn't follow up. Didn't need to. The past had already handled him better than I ever could. The house feels lighter now. The photos on the walls haven't changed, but the feeling inside them has. The quiet is different too, not a silence filled with tension or what-if questions, but one that leaves room to breathe. Room to think. Room to just live. The kids are growing fast. Ava's reading chapter books, Nolan finally figured out how to tie his shoes. I pack lunches, fold laundry, burn toast some mornings and laugh about it with them at the table. They still ask questions, sometimes about the divorce, sometimes about why people do things that hurt each other. I answer what I can. Honestly, without bitterness. Because that's the world I want them to grow up in. Not one built on resentment, but one built on truth. I didn't plan for any of this. But I'm standing in it now. And we're doing just fine.